It all began with a seemingly harmless segment on the Daily Roast, Jon Stewart's newest political comedy show that had been steadily regaining traction with younger progressive viewers since his return to television in late 2024. In a monologue that was meant to poke fun at the Trump administration's communication team, Stewart delivered what would become the spark for a fiery national moment. "When I look at Karoline Leavitt, I don't see a White House press secretary. I see a poli-sci sophomore who got lost on her way to her internship and somehow ended up briefing the world. Did she even graduate with a real degree, or was it one of those online leadership certificates?" The live audience roared. Social media lit up within minutes. But what Stewart thought was just another sarcastic jab in his usual monologue sparked something bigger, because Karoline Leavitt was watching. And she wasn't about to let the world believe her credentials were a joke. By 9 a.m. the next morning, Leavitt had posted a sharply worded tweet that read, "Dear Jon Stewart, unlike your comedy, my education is no joke. Proud UNH grad with a bachelor's in political science and journalism, summa cum laude. I'm free Friday. Invite me on your show and let's see who actually studied facts." The internet exploded. Within hours, #Karoline vs. Jon was trending. Right-wing pundits hailed her confidence, calling her the new face of conservative fearlessness, while liberal commentators mocked her for taking the bait. But Stewart, always game for a clash of minds, responded on air that same evening, "Karoline Leavitt, consider this an open invitation. Friday, live. You bring your transcript, and I'll bring my sarcasm. Deal?" The White House approved it. After all, President Donald Trump had long believed in Leavitt's ability to command a room. "She's tough. She's smart. She's got more spine than most men in D.C.," he told reporters outside Marine One. "Let her go in and teach that clown a thing or two." By Thursday, the political world was holding its breath. Everyone from CNN to Fox News was advertising the upcoming showdown. It wasn't just a PR stunt anymore. It was a moment of ideological collision, symbolizing the cultural divide that had consumed America for nearly a decade. Inside the West Wing, Leavitt prepped relentlessly. Unlike the loud, brash, off-the-cuff tone Stewart was known for, she knew her ammunition would need to be facts, dignity, and confidence under pressure. She worked late into the night with senior comms advisors, rehearsing likely questions, gathering policy points, and yes, printing out her full academic record for dramatic effect. "Don't just defend your degree," one aide advised. "Make him regret ever questioning your legitimacy." Meanwhile, Stewart's writers were loading their comedy cannons. One staffer leaked a joke that was supposedly going to be used in the opening. "She studied journalism? Must have been from the School of Alternative Facts." If they expected Karoline to crumble, they clearly hadn't been paying attention. Friday arrived. The stage was set. The crowd was a typical mix of Gen Z liberals, suburban moderates, and a few MAGA hats peppered in for the spectacle. Stewart greeted the audience with his usual smirk. "Tonight, we have someone from the Trump White House who voluntarily came into enemy territory. Either she's fearless, or she has no idea what she just walked into." Cue laughter. Then the lights shifted. Stewart turned to the guest chair and announced, "Please welcome Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary and professional glarer at CNN reporters." She walked out confidently in a navy blue blazer, American flag pin on her lapel, and a thick manila folder under her arm. The crowd clapped, but there was an edge to it. This wasn't going to be comedy. It was going to be a confrontation. Karoline Leavitt sat down across from Jon Stewart, her expression composed, almost amused. She gave the audience a polite nod before turning back to Stewart, who was already bracing himself behind his signature mug, smirking like a lion awaiting a chase. "Karoline Leavitt," he began dramatically, "the youngest press secretary in modern history. Harvard didn't return your calls? Or were you just really committed to live free or die?" A smattering of laughter broke out. Leavitt smiled politely. "Actually, I was accepted to several competitive programs," she said. "But I chose the University of New Hampshire because I believe in strengthening local institutions. My family's from Rockingham County. I didn't need an Ivy League degree to understand America. I needed to be with Americans." The audience quieted. Stewart looked mildly taken aback. That wasn't the defensive tone he had expected. "All right, Let's start with the basics, he said, flipping a card. Bachelor's in political science and journalism, right? Correct, she said. Summa cum laude. Internship at Fox News. Ran press for 2 New Hampshire congressional campaigns. Joined President Trump's 2020 team before I was even 24. Anything else you want to verify? She slid the manila folder across the desk. Stewart opened it slowly. Let me guess, he said sarcastically. A coloring book titled My Degree in Crayons? The audience chuckled, but it was nervous now. He opened the folder. Inside were neatly printed transcripts, reference letters from professors, and her final thesis, The New Media Divide, a study of political communication in the digital age. 87 pages. He raised his eyebrows. That's a lot of footnotes. It was published in the UNH Honors Political Journal, she added casually. I argued that post-2016 media bias pushed voters to trust partisan echo chambers, on both sides. Turns out I was ahead of the curve. Jon chuckled again but shifted in his seat. You've done your homework. I'll give you that, he muttered. But you're still representing a president who once suggested injecting bleach. Laughter surged again, but this time, Leavitt leaned in. And you're still representing a media class that built its career mocking half of the country instead of listening to them, she shot back. I'm not here to defend everything ever said at a podium. I'm here to represent facts, policy, and the people who voted for this administration, including millions who felt silenced by legacy media elites. The room was still. Jon blinked. I'm sorry, he said, waving his hand for comedic effect. Did someone just recite a campaign slogan? Or is this a TED Talk on victimhood? Now she chuckled. No, she said firmly. This is a reality check. The next 15 minutes were a whirlwind of questions. Some biting, others genuine. Stewart grilled her on climate policies, tariffs, and free speech. She responded point by point, armed not only with statistics and footnotes, but with a unique calmness that rattled Stewart's usual rhythm. When he asked about Trump's tough stance on the press, she replied, You call it tough. I call it accountability. For decades, major networks have gotten things wrong, knowingly. Russia collusion? Hunter Biden's laptop? We watched stories buried or twisted based on politics. That's not journalism. That's activism. When he pushed on immigration, she countered, This administration believes in legal immigration, security, and sovereignty. Funny how the people with fences around their mansions call border walls immoral. Each time she spoke, the audience grew quieter. Not because they agreed, but because they hadn't expected her to be so articulate, so prepared. Even Stewart, known for his clever pivots, began to play defense. You sound less like a press secretary and more like a debater at the Lincoln-Douglas finals. Debate is a lost art in politics, she replied. We prefer tweets and TikToks. But I was raised to back up my beliefs, not bury them in sarcasm. The crowd murmured. Stewart tapped his pen against his mug. He looked at her for a moment. Not as a punchline, but as a formidable presence. He broke the tension with a joke. So, you're telling me the youngest member of the Trump comms team is also the most prepared person I've had at this desk all month? Leavitt smiled. I've been underestimated my whole life. I've also made a career out of proving people wrong. The camera cut to commercial. But everyone in the studio knew this was no ordinary interview. This was a cultural standoff, and Karoline Leavitt had just won the first round. The moment the commercial break hit, Jon Stewart leaned back in his chair and looked at Karoline with a wry smile. Not the sarcastic kind he usually wore, but a genuine one that carried a hint of surprise. You really brought the binder, he said, gesturing toward the folder. Most guests just try to charm the audience with one-liners. Leavitt replied coolly, I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to be heard. The producers counted them back in. The cameras rolled once again. What came next was the segment that would break the internet within hours. We're back, Stewart said. And I've got to say, whether you love her or hate her, Karoline Leavitt just handed me a folder thicker than most CNN corrections. A ripple of laughter broke out. But this time it didn't carry the usual dismissiveness. Something had shifted. Stewart's own audience was beginning to sense that Karoline was not the caricature they had been led to expect. Then came the moment. "So," Stewart said, "you've defended your degree, your credentials, your administration. Let's test what's underneath that resume. What's one thing you actually agree with progressives on?" Without missing a beat, Karoline replied, "Big tech is a threat to democracy." The audience murmured in surprise. She continued, "We may differ on the why, but the how is clear. Tech giants manipulate information. They silence voices they disagree with. That's not capitalism. That's censorship under a monopoly shield." Jon blinked. "That, I wasn't expecting." Karoline leaned in slightly. "You should. The First Amendment isn't left or right. It's American." The room went quiet for a moment. That quote would be plastered across social media in less than 5 minutes. By the end of the interview, Jon offered a handshake, which Karoline took without hesitation. "I gotta admit," Stewart said, half laughing, "you're good." "I've been underestimated before," she repeated, "but never out-researched." As the credits rolled, the internet exploded. Clips from the interview flooded every platform. Twitter, TikTok, Truth Social, Instagram, each flooded with hot takes, memes, and breakdowns. Within an hour, hashtags like #Karoline Leavitt, #Stewart Showdown, and #She Brought the Binder were trending globally. A tweet from conservative commentator Megyn Kelly read, "Karoline Leavitt just turned Jon Stewart's studio into a lecture hall, and he was the student." Fox News was already airing side-by-side comparisons, proudly playing her best sound bites on repeat. On the 5, Jesse Watters declared, "She just did more to explain conservative values to a hostile audience in 25 minutes than half the GOP does in a year." Even Elon Musk chimed in on X. "Say what you will, but that was a masterclass in debate prep. Respect." Meanwhile, liberal Twitter was in turmoil. Some praised Stewart for letting the other side speak with civility, while others condemned him for platforming dangerous propaganda. A few even turned on him. Why let a Trump mouthpiece walk in and dominate the room unchallenged? Stewart got rolled. Stewart himself tweeted a simple sentence that instantly went viral. "Sometimes you invite someone to a roast and they bring a flamethrower." Back at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, President Donald Trump watched the interview replay in the private theater. A grin stretched across his face. "That's my girl," he said proudly. She made Stewart look like an intern at The Onion. In the briefing room the next morning, reporters peppered Leavitt with questions, not about policy, but about the now iconic moment. "Karoline, were you trying to go viral?" "No," she replied. "I was trying to tell the truth. But I don't mind if the truth goes viral." One reporter asked if she'd do it again. "In a heartbeat," she said. "But next time, I'll bring a bigger binder." Within days, Karoline's appearance was being analyzed in think pieces, podcasts, and even late-night reaction videos. College debate teams used the segment as a case study. Media schools clipped the interview as an example of how to stay composed under hostile questioning. Even Stewart's fiercest defenders had to admit, she hadn't just shown up, she had shown out. She was polished, prepared, and persuasive. And more importantly, she had shattered the narrative that Trump administration officials couldn't hold their own outside of friendly media circles. But the story wasn't over yet. Jon Stewart, known for rarely inviting the same guest twice, made a shocking announcement on his next show. "All right, folks, due to popular demand, and because I may or may not have been publicly humiliated, we've invited Karoline Leavitt back. This time, for a debate. Real issues, real time, no folders allowed." The audience cheered. It was on. Again. The buzz was deafening. Cable news countdowns, YouTube streamers, Twitter threads. It was as if a championship boxing match had been announced. But instead of gloves and rings, it was intellect and ideology going head-to-head once more. Karoline Leavitt versus Jon Stewart. Round 2 this time. It wasn't framed as a talk show appearance. Stewart's team promoted it as a live debate special. Primetime, uncensored, and unfiltered. No pre-screened topics. No commercial breaks. Just two people, two chairs, One stage and millions watching from both sides of the political spectrum as the studio lights dimmed and the theme music faded. Jon Stewart walked onto the stage with an air of nervous excitement. His usual smirk was intact, but the glint in his eyes betrayed anticipation, and maybe just a touch of apprehension. "Good evening, America," he began. "Tonight's not a comedy show. No skits, no punchlines. Just a conversation between two very different views of America's present and its future." Then she entered Karoline Leavitt, clad in a sleek navy suit with a small American flag pinned at the collar, stepped onto the stage with composure and quiet confidence. The audience gave a mixed reaction, some clapping, some booing, but she remained unbothered. They shook hands, exchanged brief pleasantries, and took their seats across from each other. Stewart opened with a curveball. "You've had a meteoric rise. College to press secretary to national political figure. Is it ambition, ideology, or something else?" Karoline leaned forward. "I love this country. I grew up in New Hampshire with a single mother working night shifts to keep food on our table. I saw firsthand what works and what doesn't. I'm not in this for power. I'm in this to protect the principles that gave someone like me a shot at the American dream." The crowd was hushed. Stewart didn't interrupt, he nodded, then countered, "Okay, but the policies your administration supports, Trump tariffs, immigration restrictions, media wars, aren't those more about control than freedom?" Karoline smiled faintly, unfazed. "What's freedom if it only applies to the elite? You call it control, I call it course correction. We're rebalancing a system that's been hijacked by corporate lobbyists, foreign interests, and bureaucrats who've never punched a clock." The debate was officially on. For nearly an hour, the two sparred on tariffs. Stewart called them taxes on the working class. Leavitt fired back, "No, they're investments in American manufacturing. For once, we're penalizing China instead of Pennsylvania." "Immigration," Stewart pressed. "Aren't the border policies cruel?" Karoline responded, "What's cruel is letting cartels exploit children and pretending open borders are compassionate. Security is not cruelty." "The media," Stewart chuckled. "So the media's just out to get you?" "No," she said. "But when 90% of the newsroom votes one way, objectivity becomes a fantasy. That's not journalism. It's narrative shaping." The audience, diverse in ideology, hung on every word. Karoline wasn't condescending or evasive. She used data, historical references, and, most disarming of all, personal stories. A young conservative Latina in the crowd was later overheard saying, "She made me feel like we had a voice, not just talking points." Jon Stewart, for his part, was far more prepared than in their first encounter. He pushed back sharply, especially on Trump-era rhetoric and climate policy. Yet even when he landed a solid punch, Karoline would nod, acknowledge the point, and redirect with poise. The debate's climax came with a question from Stewart's side. "If Trump loses in 2028, will you support the results? Or will we get another January 6th? A hush fell over the studio. Karoline took a long pause. Her voice was calm, resolute. "Let me be crystal clear. I believe in the Constitution. If an election is fair, I will honor it, just like I expect the left to stop calling every Republican win a threat to democracy. We all have to stop treating elections like do-or-die apocalypses. The country belongs to its people, not to parties, not to networks, not to mobs." Thunderous applause erupted. Even some of Stewart's fans clapped. Stewart blinked. "That's a pretty statesmanlike answer." She smiled. "It's not about being a statesman. It's about being an American." As the credits rolled and the screen faded to black, social media once again ignited. Trending on X, hashtag Karoline vs. Stewart, hashtag Binder 2.0, hashtag She Did It Again news coverage. MSNBC. Karoline Leavitt holds her ground again. CNN. A serious debate? In 2025? It just happened. Fox News. Karoline schools Stewart in round 2. Even traditionally liberal-leaning comedians like Bill Maher praised the tone of the discussion, saying on his show, "That wasn't just good television. That was what American dialogue is supposed to be." Stewart posted one final tweet that night. "We may not agree, but I respect her grit." America needs more real talk. And more binders. Karoline responded, "Thanks, Jon. Anytime. Maybe next time, we'll debate on a factory floor in Michigan." The second debate between Jon Stewart and Karoline Leavitt became more than just a media event. It became a cultural pivot. For the first time in years, Americans on both sides of the political aisle admitted something quietly to themselves. We actually learned something. It wasn't just that Karoline had out-argued Jon Stewart, though many believed she had. It was that she brought something back into the public square that had been missing for years: conviction without cruelty. By morning, clips of the debate had exploded across platforms. Independent commentators from both the left and right praised the tone and depth of the exchange. People who once rolled their eyes at political discourse were sharing clips like they were sharing touchdown passes at the Super Bowl in classrooms across America. Civics teachers were already modifying lesson plans. One viral clip of Karoline responding to the election integrity question was even played at a high school in Wisconsin. The teacher reportedly told the students, "You don't have to agree with her, but this is how you speak truth without yelling. This is how you lead." Meanwhile, in a small town outside of Dayton, Ohio, a group of retired steelworkers who typically tuned out, those Washington types, watched the entire debate from start to finish at their Union Hall. One of them, a 62-year-old named Mike, grumbled, "I don't like Trump. Never did. But that girl, I'd hire her. She gets it." Back in Washington, President Donald Trump was watching too. Surrounded by close aides and sipping Diet Coke in the West Wing residence, he watched the entire debate on a massive flat screen. When Karoline delivered her line, "What's freedom if it only applies to the elite?" Trump turned to J.D. Vance and said with a grin, "She's got the fire. Smart as a whip. We need more of that." Vice President J.D. Vance nodded. "She's reaching the folks we haven't been able to reach in decades. She's changing the game." Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, was said to have remarked later that day, "She may be the most effective press secretary since Reagan's team. And she's just getting started." It wasn't just bluster. Karoline's inbox was flooded. University invites, international press inquiries, speaking engagements, and even publishers asking if she was open to a book deal. All within 24 hours. But Karoline didn't flinch. She showed up the next morning at her usual 7 a.m. White House briefing, binder in hand, American flag pinned neatly in place. "I appreciate the attention," she told a reporter when asked about the Stewart debate. "But I've got a job to do. The American people deserve focus, not fanfare." A week later, Stewart returned to his program with a follow-up segment titled Reflections on Karoline. He looked straight into the camera. No jokes, no satire. "I questioned her education, and she gave me an education. She didn't just defend herself. She defended a whole generation of young conservatives who've been mocked, sidelined, and underestimated. We may not agree on policy. But I agree with something she said that stuck with me. This country belongs to its people, not to parties, not to networks, not to mobs." That's a line worth remembering. It was perhaps the first time Stewart's audience ever gave a standing ovation to someone on the other side. Over the following months, Karoline's impact only deepened. Young women in colleges across the country, especially those attending state schools, community colleges, or studying political science and public communications, began to speak up more boldly in class. One young student at Appalachian State University wrote a now-viral op-ed titled, "Karoline Leavitt made me proud of my degree, even if I don't go to Yale." Even a few liberal professors had to admit in faculty circles, "We've underestimated this new wave of conservatives. They're no longer hiding, and they come prepared." Karoline Leavitt had become something more than a spokeswoman. She had become a symbol. Not of partisanship, but of intellectual courage. In an interview months later with a military veterans podcast, Karoline was asked what she took away from her on-air battles with Jon Stewart. She paused, then said, "Jon challenged me, and that's good. He forced me to sharpen my arguments. But what I really walked away with is this: America isn't dying. She's arguing. And as long as we argue in good faith and fight for the future with facts, with heart, and with humility, this country is going to be just fine." The host, a Marine who had served 3 tours in Iraq, responded with misty eyes, "Ma'am, if you ever run for office, you've got my vote." Karoline laughed, brushing it off. But in Washington, D.C., the murmurs had already begun. Leavitt 2032. She hadn't said yes. She hadn't said no. But if anyone had doubted her before, whether because of her age, her background, or her college degree, they weren't doubting anymore. They were listening.